They say an orphan's heart learns to stop breaking, but they never lived my 45 years of silence, wondering why I was the one left behind. I'm Helen, and I grew up believing I was nothing until I discovered my family replaced me with a lie, erasing me to protect their empire. Every night I hear my mother's lullaby, a ghost in my memory, and I wonder how can they live in luxury while I was left to rot? That question haunted me through decades of loneliness, a quiet ache that never dulled. I'm Helen, 45. A woman shaped by the gray walls of a Chicago orphanage where the air was always cold and hope was a word we whispered in the dark. My childhood was a patchwork of survival, hard cots, thin blankets, and the echo of a lullaby. I couldn't place a melody that felt like love I'd never known. The nuns told me I'd been abandoned at their door, a baby no one wanted, and I grew up carrying that rejection like a chain. My dreams, small my life, a fight to simply exist. I left the orphanage at 18, stepping into a world that didn't see me. I worked as a waitress, a cleaner, a cashier, my hands rough from scrubbing my back, bent from carrying the weight of survival. By 45, I was a housekeeper in Chicago. My uniform starched my days a rhythm of dusting and folding in hotels that gleamed with wealth I'd never touch. My one-room apartment was a refuge of sorts, its walls thin, the radiator hissing like a tired companion. I had no family, no roots, just a tattered doll from the orphanage and a few faded memories of friends who'd drifted away. The world saw a middle-aged woman invisible in her labor, and I let them. But beneath my worn exterior, a part of me yearned for something more, a whisper of belonging I couldn't name. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky wept as I did when I overheard a guest at the hotel mention the Whitmore family owners of a luxury hotel chain. The name struck me like a thunderclap, stirring a memory I couldn't grasp, a lullaby. A crescent moon birthmark on my wrist I'd always thought was a scar. That night I sat on my sagging bed, the rain drumming outside my hands, trembling as I searched online. The Whitmores had lost a daughter kidnapped as a baby, a case gone cold 45 years ago. They'd adopted another girl, Diana, to take her place. But when I found a photo of the missing child, my breath caught the same birthmark. The same crescent moon stared back at me. I rolled up my sleeve, tracing the mark on my wrist, my heart pounding like it might break free. I wasn't abandoned. I'd been stolen, erased from a family that should have been mine. The Whitmores were a dynasty, their hotels spanning the country, their name a symbol of wealth and power. But Diana, the girl they'd raised, was a fraud, a placeholder to secure their fortune. Rage burned through me, a fire I'd never known, but fear followed like a shadow. I was just Helen, my hands calloused, my savings, barely enough for rent. Could I face a family that had replaced me? Could I walk into their world and demand the truth? I thought of that lullaby, its melody, a thread to a mother I'd never known her love, a warmth I'd carried through the orphanage's cold years. I had to know the truth, not just for me, but for her. I applied for a housekeeping job at the Whitmore's flagship hotel, my application a quiet act of defiance. When they hired me, I packed my few belongings, my birthmark, a secret map, and stepped into a world that should have been mine. I was ready to uncover their lies, but I had no idea how much it would tear me apart. The Whitmore Hotel was a world of polished marble and golden light, its chandeliers casting a glow that felt like a mockery of my shadowed past. I moved through its halls in my housekeeper's uniform, the gray apron tied tight over my faded dress, my hands rough from polishing silver and scrubbing floors. At 45, I was a ghost to the guests, a woman they'd never see, but my eyes were sharp, searching for the truth I'd come to claim. I'd been stolen from this family, replaced by a fraud named Diana. And I was here to prove I was Helen Whitmore, the rightful heir to this empire of luxury. Each day I dusted the portraits in the grand lobby, my father, Edward Whitmore. His smile a distant warmth, my stepmother, Margaret, her gaze as cold as the diamonds on her fingers. And Diana, 40, the imposter, they'd raised her smile a perfect lie. They didn't know I was watching my crescent moon birthmark hidden beneath my sleeve, a silent vow of who I was meant to be. I began my search quietly, listening to whispers in the staff room, rifling through papers left on desks after hours. Diana was the family's golden child, poised to inherit the hotel chain, her engagement to a senator's son, a glittering headline. Margaret doted on her while I cleaned the suites. She lounged in her laughter, a sharp reminder of all I'd lost. But I found a friend in Mrs. Ellis, a 70-year-old cook who'd worked for the family since my father's time. One evening, she caught me staring at his portrait, my eyes brimming, and placed a weathered hand on mine. "You look like him." She whispered, her voice soft with memory. I showed her my birthmark, my voice breaking as I told her my story. Her tears fell as she hugged me. "You're Helen," she said, her embrace a lifeline. "I always knew you weren't gone." She promised to help, her loyalty a flicker of hope in a world of deceit. I needed more allies, so I turned to Ruth, a friend from the orphanage who'd become a seamstress, her laughter a rare warmth in my cold life. Over coffee in my cramped apartment, I shared my plan, my hands trembling around the mug. "You're chasing a dream, Helen," she said, but her eyes were kind. "I'm with you." I trusted her. My heart opened for the first time in years, but a week later, Diana cornered me in the staff quarters, her eyes glinting with malice. "You think you can snoop around Helen," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Ruth sold your story for $5,000. She couldn't resist. My breath caught the betrayal, a jagged knife in my chest. Ruth, my sister in all but blood, had traded my trust for money, her own struggles, outweighing our bond. Diana smirked, her voice dripping with triumph. "You're finished." She reported me to Margaret, who summoned me to her office, her tone icy. "You're a troublemaker," she said, firing me on the spot. I left with nothing but my apron, my dreams crumbling, the hotel's doors slamming shut behind me. I could have walked away, but Mrs. Ellis's words burned in my mind. "You're a Whitmore." I sneaked back into the hotel at night, my heart pounding as I searched Diana's office, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I found a locked drawer and pried it open with a hairpin, my breath hitching as I uncovered emails, Margaret instructing Diana to keep up the act, confirming she was a fraud. I snapped photos, my hands steady with rage, and sent them to Mrs. Ellis, who promised to find a lawyer. I was so close, the truth within my grasp. But Diana struck again, framing me for theft. She planted a stolen necklace in my locker, and the next day security dragged me into the lobby, their accusations echoing through the marble halls. Guests stared, their whispers cutting deep. Thief. Shameful. Margaret watched her smile, thin and cruel, while Diana played the victim, her tears a perfect performance. The humiliation seared me, my name already fragile, now a stain in their eyes. I was escorted out, the hotel's grandeur fading behind me, my hope buried under the weight of their lies. Mrs. Ellis became my sanctuary, sneaking me into her small apartment above the hotel kitchen, her hands trembling as she poured tea. "We'll fight this," she said, her voice firm despite her age. She'd found a lawyer willing to help, and we planned to confront the family with the emails. But that night I woke to the wail of sirens, my heart sinking as I rushed to her side. Mrs. Ellis had suffered a stroke, her frail body still in her bed, her eyes closed forever. I held her hand, sobbing, the scent of her lavender soap clinging to the air. She'd been my guide, my proof, the one who saw me as Helen. Without her, I was adrift, my fight hollowed by another loss. I thought I'd hit my lowest, but the final blow was waiting. I broke into Margaret's office, my desperation a wildfire, and found a safe hidden behind a painting of my father. Using a code Mrs. Ellis had once shared my birth date, I opened it, my hands shaking as I pulled out a file. Inside were DNA records proving I was Helen Whitmore, the true daughter. But there was more. A letter from my father, his handwriting shaky. I know Helen's alive, but Margaret threatens to ruin us. I'm sorry, my darling. My father had known I was out there, but Margaret had silenced him, paying off officials to erase my birth records, ensuring I'd never be found. The betrayal was a dagger twisting deeper. She'd not only stolen me, but buried my father's fight to bring me home. I stood in that office, the file heavy in my hands, my world in pieces. I was 45, my body weary, my heart scarred. Ruth had sold me out. Diana had shamed me, Mrs. Ellis was gone, and Margaret had orchestrated it, all her lies, a web I couldn't escape. I looked at my father's painting, his eyes warm with a love I'd never feel, and heard my mother's lullaby, a faint melody in my memory. I'd lost everything, my friend, my mentor, my father's hope. Was I strong enough to face them one last time? Or would their empire crush me as they'd always planned? I slipped the file into my bag, my resolve a flickering ember, and prepared for a battle that would either save me or break me forever. I stood in Margaret's office, the file in my hands, a trembling weight, its pages a testament to 45 years of stolen life. The DNA records proved I was Helen Whitmore, the true daughter of Edward Whitmore, but my father's letter. I know Helen's alive, but Margaret threatens to ruin us. I'm sorry, my darling, was a wound that bled fresh. Margaret had paid to erase my existence, silencing my father's desperate fight to find me, ensuring I'd remain a ghost in an orphanage, while Diana, the imposter, lived the life meant for me. Ruth had sold me out for $5,000. Diana had framed me for theft. Mrs. Ellis was gone, and now this my father's love buried under Margaret's lies. I was 45, my body weary from years of labor, my heart scarred by betrayal after betrayal. Yet as I traced the crescent moon birthmark on my wrist, I heard my mother's lullaby, a faint melody that had carried me through the orphanage's cold nights. I couldn't let Margaret's empire stand on my parents' graves. I slipped the file into my bag, my resolve a fragile ember, and prepared for a battle I wasn't sure I could win. I didn't return to the hotel. I went to court. Mrs. Ellis, before her stroke, had connected me with a lawyer named Clara, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, whose quiet intensity gave me hope. Clara filed an emergency injunction to freeze the Whitmore assets, citing the DNA evidence, the emails I'd found in Diana's office, and the forged adoption papers that had placed Diana in my rightful spot. The hearing was set for a crisp Chicago morning, the kind where the wind bit at your skin, carrying the scent of lake water and diesel. I stood outside the courthouse, my hands clammy, my borrowed suit a size too big, its sleeves brushing my wrists like a reminder of how small I felt. But I touched the birthmark on my wrist, feeling my father's warmth, as if he were beside me, his smile urging me forward. I walked through the heavy doors, my heart pounding. Knowing Margaret Diana and the fate of the Whitmore legacy waited inside. The courtroom was a cavern of polished wood and muted light, the air thick with tension as whispers rippled through the gallery. The Whitmore board filled the seats, their suits crisp, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Diana sat at the defense table, her engagement ring glinting under the fluorescent lights, her face a mask of practiced innocence. Margaret was beside her, a queen in a tailored navy suit, her diamonds catching the light like shards of ice, her gaze as cold as ever. They thought I was finished, fired as a housekeeper, publicly shamed, as a thief, a nobody they'd crushed under their heels. But I wasn't here to beg. I was here to end their reign. Clara stood beside me, her presence a steady anchor as the judge called the hearing to order her gavel, a sharp crack that silenced the room. I took my place, my hands clasped to hide their trembling, my eyes fixed on the judge, a woman in her 60s, with a no-nonsense stare. Clara presented the DNA records, her voice clear and unwavering. Helen Whitmore is the biological daughter of Edward Whitmore, she said, laying out the proof. She showed the emails, Margaret's instructions to Diana to keep up the act, and the forged adoption papers that had cemented Diana's place. The gallery buzzed the board, shifting uncomfortably, but Margaret didn't flinch. "This is a fabrication," she said, her voice smooth as silk, her eyes locked on the judge. "She's a desperate woman, a fraud chasing a fortune she'll never have." Diana nodded her tears, a perfect performance. She tried to ruin my life, she said, her voice breaking. She's obsessed with destroying our family. I felt the weight of their lies, the same weight that had kept me invisible for 45 years, but I stood tall, my voice raw but steady. I'm not here for your fortune, I said, my eyes burning into Margaret's. I'm here for my family, for the mother you stole, for the father you silenced. I held up my father's letter, his handwriting a testament to his love. He knew I was alive, I said, my voice trembling with grief and fury. He tried to find me, but you paid to bury my existence to keep your empire safe. You replaced me with a fraud, but I'm here now. The judge's eyes narrowed her gaze, shifting to Margaret, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. Clara played a recording Mrs. Ellis had left a voicemail from years ago, her voice shaky but clear. I saw Margaret with the officials. She paid them to erase the girl's records. I should have spoken sooner. The courtroom erupted the board's whispers, turning to shouts, Diana's face paling as the truth landed like a thunderclap. Margaret's composure cracked her hands, gripping the table, her voice a snarl. That's inadmissible. But the judge wasn't listening. She ordered an immediate audit of the Whitmore estate, suspending Diana's inheritance, pending a full investigation. I thought that was the turning point, but the real shock came from an unexpected source. During a recess, a man approached me, a cousin Thomas, whom I'd met briefly at the hotel. He was in his 30s with my father's kind eyes and had seemed supportive when I first arrived, offering me coffee and a sympathetic ear. I believe you, he'd said then, his smile warm. I'd clung to that kindness, seeing him as an ally, someone who might help me navigate the family's labyrinth. But as he approached now, his face was pale, his hands fidgeting. Helen. He whispered, his voice low. I need to tell you something. My heart lifted, hoping for another piece of evidence, another ally. But his next words were a dagger. I've been working with Margaret, he said, his eyes dropping to the floor. She paid me to keep an eye on you, to report your every move. I didn't want to, but she threatened my inheritance, my kid's future. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, the courtroom's hum fading to a distant roar. Thomas, the cousin I'd trusted, the one who'd seemed to see me, had been Margaret's spy, feeding her my plans, ensuring she stayed one step ahead. The betrayal was a fresh wound cutting deeper than Ruth's, deeper than Diana's lies. I thought I'd found family, a piece of my father in Thomas's smile, but it was another lie, another brick in the wall Margaret had built around me. I stumbled back, my hands shaking, my vision blurring with tears. How could you? I whispered, my voice breaking. Thomas reached for me, his eyes pleading. I'm sorry, Helen. I had no choice. But I turned away, the pain too raw, the betrayal too sharp. I'd lost Ruth, Mrs. Ellis, my father's hope, and now Thomas, the last thread of family I'd clung to. I was alone, truly alone, my fight heavier than ever. But as the hearing resumed, Clara pulled me aside, her eyes bright with something new. There's more, she said, handing me a letter she'd received that morning. It was from an anonymous source, later revealed to be a retired private investigator hired by my father years ago. The letter contained a photo of a baby bracelet inscribed with Helen W., found in a storage unit linked to one of the officials Margaret had bribed. It was mine, a keepsake my father had given the investigator to help find me a Chekhov's gun that had been waiting 45 years to fire. Clara submitted it as evidence, along with a voice recording the investigator had kept a conversation with Margaret from decades ago, her voice chilling. Make sure no one finds her. I can't lose everything. The courtroom fell silent, the board's faces ashen, Diana's tears drying as her facade shattered. Margaret's hands clenched her composure, gone, her voice a desperate hiss. This is a conspiracy. The judge wasn't swayed. She ruled in my favor, declaring me the legitimate heir, ordering Diana's removal from the family trust and Margaret's arrest for fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy. Security escorted them out. Diana's screams, echoing Margaret's face, a mask of fury as her empire crumbled. The board turned to me, their voices overlapping with offers to lead their smiles, eager but hollow. I'd done it. I'd reclaimed my name, my parents' legacy, my place. At 45, I'd turned a lifetime of loss into a moment of triumph. But as the courtroom emptied, a hollow ache settled in my chest. I thought of Ruth, her betrayal a scar I couldn't erase. Mrs. Ellis's lavender scent lingered in my memory, her absence a quiet grief. Thomas's confession burned another piece of family lost to Margaret's web. And Margaret herself, I'd seen her as a monster, but the investigator's letter revealed a deeper truth. Margaret had lost a child of her own before I was born, a stillbirth that shattered her. She'd seen me as a threat to the family she'd built a reminder of her own loss, her actions driven by a grief that twisted into cruelty. I didn't forgive her, but I understood her pain, a sympathetic shadow to her villainy, making my victory bittersweet. I stood alone in the empty courtroom, the file still in my hands, my father's letter a weight against my heart. I'd fought for justice, thinking it would fill the void, but it hadn't. Justice wasn't the hotels, the wealth, the title. It was the choice to rise above my pain, to honor my parents with something more than vengeance. I touched the crescent moon birthmark on my wrist, feeling my mother's lullaby, my father's hope. I'd accepted the leadership of the Whitmore chain, but not to rule as Margaret had. I'd transform it using its resources to create safe havens for children, like I'd been orphaned, stolen, forgotten. I'd name the first, after my mother, a place where lullabies would live again. The board hesitated, their greed palpable, but I stood firm. I wasn't their puppet. I was Helen Whitmore, and for the first time I knew who I was meant to be. As I walked out, the Chicago skyline stretched before me, its lights a canvas of possibility. I'd faced my enemies, exposed their lies, and won. But the real victory was the moment I let go of hate, choosing to carry my parents' love into a future I'd build with my own hands. I felt my mother's warmth, my father's pride, as if they were watching, their whispers guiding me forward. My journey wasn't over. There was more to do, more to become. I left the courthouse as the Chicago dusk settled over the city, the skyline a tapestry of amber and violet, the air carrying the faint tang of lake water and exhaust. At 45, I felt like I'd lived 1,000 lives, the orphaned girl clutching a tattered doll, the invisible housekeeper scrubbing away her dreams, the woman who'd faced a dynasty of lies and emerged as its rightful heir. The Whitmore empire was mine now, its hotels, a legacy I'd fought tooth and nail to reclaim. But as I walked away, my borrowed suit still stiff against my skin, I knew the victory wasn't in the boardroom or the headlines. It was in the choice I'd made to let go of the rage that had fueled me for so long, to honor my parents with a purpose that reached beyond vengeance. I'd spent 45 years searching for belonging, and now standing under the city's fading light, I'd found it not in an empire, but in the woman I'd become. The months that followed were a quiet unfolding, a rebirth I hadn't dared imagine. I moved into a modest apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, its wide windows letting in the kind of light I'd only dreamed of in the orphanage's gray walls. The lake stretched out like a promise, its surface rippling under the morning sun, and I'd sit on my small balcony with a cup of tea, the steam curling like a whisper of hope. I sold off parts of the Whitmore chain, each deal a deliberate step to dismantle the machine. Margaret had turned it into a machine that thrived on lies and greed. The profits flowed into the Grace Haven Foundation, named for my mother, a sanctuary for orphaned children and women the world had cast aside. I walked its halls on opening day, the scent of fresh paint mingling with the laughter of children, a lullaby playing softly over the speakers. I saw myself in their eyes, lost but not broken, and in the women who'd been pushed to the margins, their resilience a mirror to my own. There was Ellen, 67, who'd lost her home to a predatory loan, her hands trembling as she told me her story. Maria, 62, whose children had abandoned her after her husband's death, her smile faint but fierce, and Joyce, 70, whose laugh reminded me so much of Mrs. Ellis that I had to blink back tears. I listened to them, their voices weaving a community of strength, and with every scholarship we funded, every shelter we opened, I felt my mother's presence, her love, a thread that had never snapped. My father's smile lived in my dreams, his pride a steady light that guided me forward. Grace Haven wasn't just a foundation, it was a home, a place where lullabies could live again, where no one would be forgotten as I had been. But healing wasn't a straight path. Ruth's betrayal lingered like a bruise. I couldn't help but press her laughter, a memory I couldn't reclaim. I saw her name in a local paper once her seamstress shop shuttered her life, unraveling under the weight of her choices. I wanted to be angry to hate her for the $5,000 she'd taken to sell my trust, but I couldn't. I saw her struggle her own desperate fight for survival, and I let her go. Her absence a quiet ache I'd learned to live with. Mrs. Ellis's loss was softer, but no less heavy. I kept her recipe book on my kitchen counter, baking her lemon scones on Sundays. The scent of butter and citrus, a reminder of her faith in me. I'd whisper thanks to her as I pulled the tray from the oven, hoping she could hear me wherever she was. Thomas's betrayal cut deeper, a wound still raw. My cousin, with my father's kind eyes, had been Margaret's spy, his warmth a lie that had almost broken me. I wrote him a letter, not to forgive, but to release the pain. I wanted you to be family, I wrote, my pen shaking, but you chose her lies over my truth. I never sent it, but the act of writing it freed me the paper, a weight I could finally set down. Margaret and Diana faced their trials, fraud, obstruction, conspiracy. But I didn't follow the news. I'd let them go, their empire no longer my burden. Yet Margaret's story haunted me. She'd lost a child before I was born, a stillbirth that broke her, turning her grief into a weapon. I didn't forgive her, but I understood her pain, a sympathetic shadow that made my victory bittersweet. I found solace in my new garden, planting roses for my mother, their petals soft as her lullabies, their scent a balm for the scars I carried. The crescent moon birthmark on my wrist, once a secret I hid, now felt like a badge of who I was. Helen Whitmore, a name I'd fought to reclaim. The foundation grew its reach, stretching across the country, each new haven a testament to the love I'd carried through the orphanage's cold years. I spoke at events, my voice steady, now sharing my story with women whose nods echoed my own journey. "You're enough," I told them, and in their eyes I saw my reflection, a woman who'd turned pain into purpose. One evening, as I sat by the lake, the water shimmering under a starlit sky, I thought of the 5-year-old me clinging to a tattered doll, whispering prayers in a cold cot. I wanted to reach back to hold her, to tell her she'd find her way. I thought of the 45-year-old me, standing in that courtroom choosing love over hate. I'd spent a lifetime searching for belonging, thinking it was in a name, a legacy, a family. But it was in me all along, in the strength I'd found, the love I'd given, the life I'd built. My mother's lullaby, my father's hope, they weren't lost. They lived in every step I took, every haven I opened, every heart I touched. I looked at the stars, their light steady, and felt a truth take root. My story wasn't over. Grace Haven was just the beginning. There were more children to save, more women to lift, more shadows to light. I was 45, but my life was just starting, a life of purpose, of love, of hope. I'd keep going, carrying my parents' legacy into a future I'd never dared dream, a future where no one would be forgotten again. If my journey moved you, if you've ever found light in your darkest moments, share this story with someone who needs it. Comment below what's the one truth that set you free. Subscribe for more stories of hope, because this is only the start.